Hello and welcome everybody to Psychedelics Today. Kyle and I are here to talk to you about a really cool documentary we just watched over the weekend, and really excited to share some stuff with you about it. Wanted to really thank everybody who took the time to go out to iTunes and give us some reviews. There's some really cool stuff that got put up the other day, and really happy with how great some of you guys think we are. And hopefully we can keep delivering great content to you guys, and you keep liking us. If you want to support us, feel free to, like I said, give us a review on iTunes, maybe a 5-star rating, or tell your friends, or like us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or sign up for our email list so you don't miss anything fun. Kyle and I are starting to put on workshops. I have one workshop coming up in a couple weeks, and more will be on the books soon. Kyle's going to have some built out in the near future. You can find it through Psychedelics Today. Find his site for his workshops. Also on the agenda is the Medicinal Mindfulness Psychedelic Shine event in Boulder, Colorado, February 12th, maybe.
Yep.
Yeah, I'll be down there in Boulder. It's gonna be really fun. It's a full day event.
Dennis McKenna is going to be headlining.
Yeah, he's a headliner, and there's even some breathwork stuff going on. Just some really cool stuff happening in Boulder with Psychedelic Shine. Really excited to get involved with those guys. Anything else before we jump in?
No, but I was going to say, if you don't know anything about medicinal mindfulness, you could always go back and check out our episode with Daniel McQueen. He talks about the breathwork and cannabis. So yeah, he's doing some really awesome work, and I would definitely, if you're in the Colorado area, go definitely check that event out. I wish I could make it out there for it.
Yeah, Kyle and I are staging right now for the Psychedelic Science event in Oakland, California, sponsored by MAPS and a number of other organizations. And that's kind of over, I hate to say it this way, but it starts over like 420 weekend.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think 420 is Thursday. I'll show up either really early Friday or late Thursday, TBD. But if you're going to be there, let us know. We'd love to meet you and chat about whatever you're interested in.
Yeah.
Love to learn more about the audience. All right, cool. Good to jump?
Yeah.
All right. So we are talking about The Sunshine Makers, a new film released, I think, just like this month. Yeah, look.
Yeah, it was pretty recent.
January 20 was the opening in New York City. And then they started doing screenings in various cities on January 27th and put everything up on the web. So you can rent it on Amazon for like $5. Similar pricing on Google and iTunes. So, $4 on one, 5 or 6 on the others. But there's still some, is there any screenings in the future? There's a couple left in February. And Wilmington, Delaware, you got looks like 3 screenings. That's pretty cool. So Sunshine Makers, the concept is that we have a Breaking Bad, a real life Breaking Bad for the psychedelic set is what they call it. And in a sense, that's very true, because these guys were just running around, going all over the place, and it was very neat to see. Flying to England and then getting lysergic acid, which is like the base compound that theoretically makes the best acid, and half of the quantity flew back to the U.S. The other half flew to the Bahamas, because apparently it's easier to smuggle from the Bahamas back to the States.
Yeah, they took the boat to Miami and then drove it back out to California.
Yeah, and they would smuggle, they even showed where on their body they would smuggle stuff, like the small of their back, wherever there was like a hollow in the body shape.
I was like really curious why they had to do that. Like, if they had to go to England to get lysergic acid, was it a controlled substance, or did it just look sketchy at the time for bringing chemicals like across the country?
Yeah, so they talked about it later. The chemical distributors would actually call the authorities.
Right.
Sold it, and sometimes they'd actually set up the front desk person at the chemical supply house as so you have this FBI guy saying, okay, they've left the building in this orange van, so follow them please, and find out what house they're taking this chemical to, and put a tail on these people for a couple weeks, see if it fits into their investigation on acid. Yeah, what I found interesting too is there's this Bureau of Narcotic narcotic and dangerous drugs, BNDD or something like that, and that was like a pre-DEA agency.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to me that they kind of shift
Hmm.
names, like CIA shifted from the what the hell was it called? Man, memory. Short-term memory loss is a symptom, guys.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting that these agencies shift over time. Yeah, Department of War to Department of Defense.
Hmm.
That way. But yeah, really interesting. And so the stars of the film were Tim Scully and Nick Sand, who were pioneers. They influenced Owsley, it seems. Owsley's kind of the famous guy who developed a lot of LSD in California and funded the Grateful Dead's Wall of Sound.
Mm. Yeah, I think Owsley trained Tim, as I remember. It was interesting because the video started, and then it went for a little history, and then they show Tim getting arrested after getting off the plane, and then they backtrack 3 years later about how that happened, and then I think I remember watching that Tim was trained by Owsley, and so that's how he learned how to make acid.
Right. Okay, so Owsley was there being the expert, and those guys learned from him. And this one thing I caught with Billy Hitchcock, who's like kind of the financier of the whole thing. Did he own the Millbrook estate that Leary was living in?
He did, yeah.
So he was like incredibly influential in the whole thing, covering both coasts. Kind of a really major behind the scenes player who's now a senior executive in both oil and banking industries, which is comical to me. I'm like, oh, okay. This is how history works. This is
I never heard of him before, so it was interesting to learn a little bit about him and his background in this whole scene. And I thought the Leary estate I thought that was something that Leary owned. But I think I remember in the video they were saying Billy was the one that funded it and had the property and then leased it out to all these people.
Yeah, so in my memory, Leary found some really young, rich lady, which people like Leary do, and influenced her to help him out. And I think it was this guy's younger sister. I'm not positive on that, but that's kind of like loose memory on the situation. Someday maybe we'll cover the history of Millbrook, which is really interesting bit of history in and of itself.
Yeah.
So yeah, all these guys were coming. They went to Millbrook and said, "Okay, let's make acid together." We connected Billy. Was this place Windsor? Was that in California? Windsor, California, where they had a couple labs?
Yeah, so from what I remember from the film was Nick was on the East Coast. He was the one that connected with Leary, and then then they connected with Tim, who was on the West Coast, and then I think Tim and Nick set up a lab in Windsor, which I'm not too sure where that is. I'm guessing north of California. Or north of San Francisco. I mean,
yeah, right.
Yeah, it's in California, duh.
Let me pull it up. Windsor, California. Yeah, and these guys were famous for making what's called Orange Sunshine. It's probably the most famous LSD that's been on the market ever. And there's even SNL skits about it that they featured on the film. Who was that? It was Dan Aykroyd. Went, oh, is it barrel shaped and orange? Oh yeah.
Have you ever heard of that stuff before?
Only historically. Like I don't think people are selling it that way anymore.
Right. No, I'm just asking, like, somebody that I know that's from that generation was talking to me about all this acid, and it was almost like, it was like these different strains of cannabis, like they were talking like, oh, have you ever had like double orange barrel and orange sunshine and window pane and LSD 25? And I was like, what? I've never even heard of this stuff. Like, what are you talking about? And they're just like, oh, it's just these different kinds, like the chemists would produce these different types of acid where they would market it like that. And it's like, huh, interesting.
Yeah, right. Because you got to brand it somehow. Like, I think that's more like in our generations, ecstasy's been marketed in that way. Like the
right, yeah.
Like What are the common names right now for LSD? You got like needlepoint, fluffy,
Yeah, fluff.
and that's really it.
Yeah, the only two that I know are needlepoint and fluff.
Yeah, and
Gel. I mean, I don't know if you want to consider like gel tabs and liquid. I mean, that's what people will talk about it too.
yeah, and I think those are like subcategory, like just way
Yeah.
to package those individual like top level items. And I was just told what needlepoint was the other day by somebody, and they said it was so at the end of the line of the manufacture, LSD comes out in crystalline form, and based on how fine the crystalline structure is, that's when it becomes needlepoint. It's a really fine structure. So, you know, being needle points coming out of it, as opposed to just like a mess.
Interesting.
I haven't done much chemistry, so I don't really know.
Yeah.
Maybe someday, but yeah, currently no experience with chemistry. And then fluff, who knows? They just call it good. I thought you were talking about cannabis strains. Like you go to the pot store here in town, and there's probably you could buy 20 different varieties of seeds, all with the same names you just said.
Yeah,
that's what I thought you were talking about. I was like, yeah, there is a strain of cannabis called LSD-25. There is a
there is
Clementine Kush, all other crap like that's referencing historical stuff and historical strains. It's just kind of a hobby / marketing thing, so you can get like different genetics that theoretically have different effects, and well, they do have different effects, but it's really hard to qualify subjective stuff like that.
This person that was asking me also told me that they had a friend back in the day that had all these, I guess it was all different liquid in these ice cube trays, and then their freezer went, and supposedly it all kind of melted together, and they called it green slime.
Oh no.
But he was saying, it was a mix of like LSD-25, it was a mix of like window pane, it was a mix of orange barrel, or I don't even know. But I was like, I've never even heard of this stuff.
I heard of these punk rock anarchists in the early 90s in the Boston area, had like a gallon bottle of vodka in their freezer. Similar scenario, solid acid, no vodka whatsoever. Their whole house got raided by the FBI, DEA, or whatever, and they didn't find a thing, which is outrageous to me. But good for those guys for getting away with it. Yeah. I just cannot imagine that kind of fear, and or even in the film, there was this scene where Nick goes on vacation, pipes burst, water's running down his driveway, and the sheriff comes in. The sheriff. This didn't look like a normal we're coming in to help fix his pipes. They were going in like they knew something was up with this dude and looked at his whole house. Spoiler alert, these guys went to jail.
I was just gonna say, how much do we want to talk about this and give away the film?
I think it's okay to say that part.
Yeah. Okay, if you're listening, just watch the film first and then come listen to our.
Yeah, perhaps. We both highly recommend the film. It's worth it. If you're only going to rent it $4 or $5, $6 through one of those streaming services, or you can get it. You can buy it full pop online for what was it, $13 on Amazon?
Yeah, I think it was like $12.99 on Amazon.
Yeah, awesome. So totally worth that, especially if you're going to show it to some friends. I had 3 others watching it with me last night, and they all loved it, and they're not drug nerds, and it was still good for them. So even historically, just interesting.
Yeah. So that part really stood out for me. I don't know what part stood out for you, but just this concept of going so deep into the psychedelic realm and thinking about everything's one and everything's love, but then it's so they had these, what was it? Tim had a vision, and maybe Nick did too, of wanting to produce LSD to save the world. And that was their message from the psychedelic realm, was you got to produce this stuff and you got to give it away. And then it's also to the point, I don't know, it made me question about messages and life path and journey, where, okay, this was the message that they got. They started fulfilling their life mission from their psychedelic experience. They're beginning to like kind of integrate their experience and move forward. But then you have like these odd little synchronicities where it was like, is it their life path? Like when to call it quits? Like, so Tim called it quits at a good time, but Nick continued on, and then, you know, his house gets raided, and then so it just makes me like wonder a lot about you know, what is right, what's wrong, and like how far do you take your messages that you get from these experiences.
What are they?
Yeah.
One, what is the reality of them? It's probable that it's like one of 20 things. And how do you test that veracity of those messages? And should you really even do that at all? Like you wake up in the middle of your breathwork or LSD session and go, I need to get to the radio station, tell everybody the good news. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
You know, in a sense, yes, it's a inflated message of what's really there is that I need to be more authentic and talk to people about this directly, as opposed to getting on the news and potentially ruining the rest of your life by exposing yourself when the world isn't ready yet. But yeah, this whole when to call it quits thing, was it greed? You know, the people in law enforcement thought it was purely greed. Nick Sand pitches it as, no, the money I got was just to like have a relatively comfortable life. He didn't look extravagant, but he was setting up labs all over the place, and that takes a lot of money.
Yeah.
Scientific equipment's not cheap, and the chemicals aren't cheap, especially to try to do it in a covert way. But that thing you said a minute ago is really important. How do you balance, you know, trying to evade law enforcement as these guys in the 60s with this all is one, everything is love mentality? It's like when you're running around the world using airlines and, you know, crossing borders under assumed names, all this stuff, it's probably more effective to operate like the CEA and not necessarily be in that LSD headspace.
Right.
Unless it
Yeah,
helps.
that I don't understand. They're talking about like when they're in their lab, they're like, yeah, when you work in an acid lab, you're always high because you touch something, you'd be like, ow, that burned, and then you lick it, and then you're like, wow, I just took 2,000 micrograms of acid, and it's like, how do you? I don't know. That would be really intense. But then it was interesting too. What was it? Mike Randall from the Brotherhood of Eternal Love. He said that. I forget which one didn't go far enough. Tim, how he didn't
use it regularly. Tim had like a couple sessions.
Yeah.
Total.
And
Nick was all the time.
Yeah. And I don't understand how you function after a while.
That's where the integration things comes in. That's why we have like kind of a more evolved position now than they did then.
Yeah.
That video, like Haight-Ashbury 67 to 69, it looked like a shit show in 60,
right?
Like amphetamines and heroin and whatever else. And just kind of, I don't know. Have you been to Haight-Ashbury? Have you?
I have not. I just been for like a day, explored, walked down like the street, but I haven't spent a lot of time there.
I only spent like an hour or two. It was a shit show. Like, and it's kind of a throwback to it looked very similarly to what it probably looked like in 69. I saw a lot of homeless guys like fighting each other and just scary looking individuals. It wasn't this like free love, like 1967 looking place. It was quite scary. And
right. Yeah. I do remember.
Yeah. That's exactly what happened.
And there's a ton of homeless people in San Francisco. Every time I've been like walking down Mission Street, it's just like, whoa.
I think it's just great weather. Like, there's always going to be homeless, and lovely weather to be homeless in is San Francisco. It probably gets a little cold once in a while, but you know, compared to Boston or something like that,
Vermont.
Yeah, like doesn't make any sense to be homeless in the winter in Vermont.
No.
Get the hell out. Go to Albuquerque or something. But you know, I don't mean to be insensitive to homeless, but it's like drugs clearly influence some percentage of the homeless population. And
well, that law enforcement guy even said, I forget his name on the video, where he was saying like, it was like this place of love and expansion, but then it just turned into like like a city of lost souls. Like
Mhm.
169 rolled around with all the drug, like people still seeking, but they're not integrating. It just became like a habit of continually doing drugs. And yeah, so I always think it's like like you get the message, but like when do you hang up? You know, there's that, maybe Alan Watts said it. It's like you get the message, you hang up, you go do your work.
It's either Watts or McKenna, I forget.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a great line. Yeah, you got the message, hang up the phone, go to work. It, acid is just so easy to just keep doing. It's cheap, it's available. It doesn't necessarily work as well the next day, but you take every other day,
Right.
probably just fine. So and it feels good for a lot of people. It's like how else could you feel that good for so cheap?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, weed's pretty expensive and it doesn't make you feel that great.
That's true. And the duration is,
Yeah.
10 to 12 hours.
Yeah.
8 to 12.
That's probably the average.
Yeah.
Um,
Most bang for your buck.
That's very true. Very true. That's fascinating. And so that was really interesting to me, watching early 60s, mid 60s, late 60s. And the film kind of did a decent job showing that. One thing I really liked was Nick Sand's commitment. Like, he was so committed throughout the whole thing and appears to still be very committed, even though he did some time.
And that's what it seems like a lot of his lovers said too. He's just very driven. Like he had his life mission and he was just going at it, and nothing was going to really stop him in some sense. Like he just had that drive and that charisma and that passion.
Yeah. Which is, charming to a degree. I'd love to get Nick on the show and talk to him about it.
That'd be really cool.
He's still around, he's late 70s, I think.
What did they say? He's in Ecuador at the end? I think he's living in Ecuador now.
Internet.
Yeah.
Ecuador, so we can get him. It was just so cool watching how committed he was, and then, how diverse he was in the end. Like, there's that closing scene where some law enforcement group is going, wow, there's not really much he didn't manufacture. Incredible. And, for the amount of time he was manufacturing, the odds are good that some of our listeners used some of the chemicals he produced, which is fascinating.
Did he, I wonder, I mean, I guess he probably produced some, but he didn't create it. Like Shulgin created a whole bunch of different
he was more of a manufacturer,
right,
than a R&D,
research and designer.
Yeah. Which is easy, right? Like, you got Shulgin's books. There's probably a handful of other books.
Yeah.
Like, what do you have? The Practical Manual of LSD Manufacture was one of the books they found at his house. It's like, oh, really? So you have that. You have a book on drug smuggling. Whoa. Okay. But you got all these other books too. Meaning you're probably living quite the interesting, life.
Mm-hmm.
The length of time he was able to operate was unbelievable.
That blew my mind on how he would just go. He went to California, then who would go to St. Louis? I think out of all the places, why would you go to St. Louis to set up a lab, and then ending up in Canada? It was just absolutely mind blowing.
Do you have a guess on, based on the movie, how long he was producing for? It's 35 years.
Well, I think when he got to Canada, it said he was still producing for another 20 years, as I remember.
96, I think, is when he
got busted. So I don't know. That's a long time to be producing. I mean, so if he started in the late 60s, he got busted in 96. I mean,
probably producing for 25, 26 years, time, which is incredible. It's unfathomable to me, that kind of. I got a pretty straight-laced job, so just cutting away from that and going, okay, let's do this dangerous illegal stuff, and skirt the law and turn a lot of people on.
Mm-hmm.
It's cool that some people have that conviction. I think, this particular culture kind of needs that, but at the same time, it's like we don't want to lose those people to the law.
Right.
So perhaps teach more people how to do it and then produce on a lower scale, so your sentence is way less. Like, that kind of, because this world, it's a really small world, and one person getting caught is a really big deal, and we don't.
Yeah, that was really interesting. How one person getting caught, then like that whole network and that whole group kind of was sucked into it as well. But I kind of appreciate, I think Tim was saying later on after he called it quits, or maybe towards like when he in 69, when he started seeing like the hate kind of go downhill, that maybe LSD is not the thing that's going to save the world and wake up humanity. And didn't he say he started getting more interested in natural ways, so he started getting into, what was it, biofeedback?
Yeah, they're doing the brainwave thing.
Yeah,
a little bit. Is interesting.
So I always think about that too. Like, we talk about these substances a lot, and there's definitely great therapeutic benefit in the realm of like mental health, and also for creativity, and I mean, there's great benefit, no doubt.
Symposia guys always would mention pleasure.
Pleasure, yeah.
Really good sometimes. So
yeah.
Why is it taboo for things to feel good? But yeah, like you and I always focus on breathwork, shamanism, yoga. Like we throw these things in because they can have profound effects as well for people, and often in a healthier way. Because drugs are just so easy. It's like, boop, okay, now I'm enlightened. But it's really, no, this is a long process.
Yeah.
And it's most effective to play a long game. As opposed to charging forward and thinking you're getting enlightenment in a 2-month period.
Yeah, and I always wonder too how ungrounded you can become if you're constantly exploring. I mean, after my near-death experience, like, man, I was trying to live out in the cosmos because I thought that was like home, because I was like,
right.
Well, I think that's where we go when we die, and that's home to me. And after a while, you realize you are stuck in this body, and you are confined to the physical reality. And so how do you actually live in it instead of living out in the cosmos and exploring constantly?
Yeah, so you get this glimpse of, like, you start as this alienated kind of separate individual going, oh, the world's awful, and then you go, oh, I'm connected to everything, and then, oh, it's $10 away for me to feel connected from everybody again. You just keep doing it, and you get this habit that reinforces your inflation, and then you end up even more alienated because nobody else is doing that much drugs around you. Odds are good nobody's doing that much. And then you end up even more alienated in a really bad spot, and it feels worse. Really crippling depression and anxiety and all this other stuff.
I wonder too, like, wonder what some of those people have seen or what they've experienced, just taking it all the time. What was it, like Mike Randall just kept saying, like, you just reach a point where you're just one with everything when you do it all the time. But it also makes me think about that story with Ram Dass when he was up in the States, and him, Leary, and I forget who else was there. They tried to have that experiment where they just locked themselves in. It's in the book Be Here Now, where they would take, I think, around like 1,200 micrograms a day and try and just get completely floored, so they can never come down. And then at the end, Ram Dass got really sick, and he's like, and after all that, you finally end up coming down. And Ram Dass has completely changed his life around. I mean, he's became a devotee of yoga, and now
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that was at Millbrook. I do remember them talking about that. And yeah, they did all sorts of, they were calling it research, which in those days, I suppose it really could be called research because there wasn't all that much known. Like Groff was doing his research in the USSR. There's some folks doing it in the States in university settings or hospitals. But yeah, like, what are the limits of this drug? Like, where can it take you? It's a really interesting question.
Yeah.
I think
Like I always think about that with Shulgin, how he just starts synthesizing all sorts of different compounds. Like, what the hell did he experience? Like some
yeah,
of those compounds that no human has ever touched, and he's just like testing them out. It's like, what part of the mind is he accessing? Like, what is he seeing? Like, you see like elves and like aliens on DMT. Like, it's like, is there another dimension somewhere else in these other compounds that he's creating? Like, I don't know. So
yeah,
it's really
exactly.
interesting.
So I've been thinking about this in terms of art. Like, say you have these painters or musicians, they're kind of like generating new dimensions, new worlds, new ways of experiencing the world. Which kind of is new ways of experiencing the world is almost the same as having new dimensions to explore.
Mm.
Um, and the same way Bach, Beethoven, Grateful Dead, Fish, whoever else, Humphreys, all these bands kind of create a new experience that's very different from one another. They also have this kind of love at their feet. But Shulgin's kind of doing the same thing with these drugs, saying like, okay, the thing that gets me, off or high or whatever is being able to live in this world where I'm constantly generating new chemicals and able to bring them to humanity through these books. And fascinating.
Mm.
And just hearing him talk about his philosophy is really fascinating, where we just don't have enough data to make categorical statements about what reality is and what these drugs show us about reality. Like we're infants,
Right,
in science and our understanding of the world, and we have to accept that if we want to be reasonable thinkers. Um, like Richard Dawkins saying like XYZ selfish gene, like materialist world, all this stuff's like stuff's like more complex than that, man.
Yeah.
And drugs will show you that.
Mm-hmm.
But say you get that experience of angels, the white light, orange light, whatever. It has to be juxtaposed against everything else that you already know. So it's just like one sliver of experience, drops of experience.
Drops of experience.
One thing Lenny said to me a while ago was really interesting was what's that big church in Harvard Square? Swedenborg. The mystic Swedenborg. So there was this mystic philosopher, kind of Swedenborg. He had all these visions, did painting, did a lot of writing. So there's this like Swedenborgian rite of Freemasonry. There's like a whole Christian church. They have an enormous church in the middle of Harvard Square, and a lot of it was like Christianity reimagined through this mystic's writings. He had this one experience of the world on fire, and wrote about it at length. And he heard or had the experience of the world being on fire later. I don't remember which one. And saying, "Oh, well, yeah, I just like tapped into Swedenborg's vision." And, later, I personally had like a similar vision of the world being on fire, everything burning, and perhaps I tied into that same little drop of experience that was there for eternity. So it's kind of like the Whitehead stuff we talked about, Alfred North Whitehead, the process philosopher,
right?
And really interesting ways of looking at reality, for sure.
Yeah, I always appreciated Lenny's description of Whitehead and reality of flashes of experience, kind of like how the film drops and each film is just projected on the screen through flashes of light. So it's like flashes of experience.
And each frame is eternal and timeless, exists outside of the timeline, is always there for us to tap into, which is one way that we can help rationalize the stuff that can come up in breath work or in drug sessions. It's like, oh, how the hell would you have this experience of living in this Indian village, or Cleopatra or whatever, Napoleon, like this whole past life story where like I was Napoleon in a past life. It's like, well, what if this is all of our shared history and you just tapped into tapped into it because it's there to access, just like a hard drive,
right?
It's always there, the Akashic archives or whatever.
Right. Yeah, the Akashic records,
all this stuff is always there. Like everything that's always happened is always there for us to access, and these drugs or breathwork can make it available. And I think this is stuff that made the hippies have this kind of magical worldview where everything was fine. It's cool to have a magical worldview. It's just, it can be dangerous if not approached in the right way.
Yeah.
Might end
Well,
up-
it's also like one of the first times in like US history, I mean, or probably in a while, that people are exploring their minds. So yeah, it was like this kind of child having this great experience, this toy, and they're like, "Whoa, like this is fascinating."
Yeah.
And because we've been so disconnected for so long, like I think in the Western civilization, like the last type of probably rites of passage that were maybe psychedelic related were in the Greek Eleusinian mysteries or the Dionysius wine rites. I mean,
Which
after
like barely bled over into Rome, but just like,
yeah, I mean, once Rome and Christianity and Catholicism took over, a lot of that stuff started to become taboo and work of the devil. And besides the indigenous people, I mean, Western civilization has been pretty disconnected from it. I mean, you had some people in the late 1800s. Who was the guy that discovered mescaline? I think that was towards like the end of the 1800s. That they
Hefter?
Maybe, I forget.
I think it was because you and I were trying to like remember the like why was Hefter Foundation named Hefter Foundation? It was
right.
a German chemist that like synthesized it first, maybe, or extracted it first in its pure form. But yeah, that's a long historical gap. That's like, when was the first council in Nicaea? I think it was like 360 when the Romans kind of like codified their version of the Bible, and that's probably the same time when all these little small cults got stamped out, rolling underground. So that's not so great with math.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're right. Mescaline was first isolated in 1897 by Arthur Hefter.
Nice.
And then
my memory's not all good.
For isolated and identified, and then first synthesized by Ernest Spath in 1919.
Cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's really interesting. It's like a 1,500-year gap in Western culture of, no regular psychedelic use for any above board group of people. It's always possible. I think it's likely that in certain conclave like groups, there was probably psychedelic use, like the Sufis, not exactly Western, but really close, especially with the Crusades touching Western culture. There's probably some back and forth transit of that stuff, especially in the elite circles.
I definitely think probably some people had access to, especially the explorers stumbling across these different cultures as exploring new land. I'm sure they probably came across some sort of plant medicine. But I think, on a large scale, like societal level, when everybody is kind of participating in this rite, because you talk to any like people of the 60s, and like if you asked them if they've partaken, they're like, I was a child of the 60s, and it's kind of like that's their motto. And yeah, I don't know, it's interesting to just think about like that. It was kind of like the birth of Western consciousness in some sense, where everybody was just kind of waking up at the same time and getting these really crazy ideas. Well, maybe not crazy, but being exposed to Eastern philosophy and just having a different view of the mind and what consciousness is.
To a degree, it's interesting. It's almost like McKenna's theory that early hominids were eating a lot of mushrooms, and then they had this rapid cranial brain expansion, just due to the increased blood flow, increased thinking, different kinds of thinking.
Yeah.
But it's also like, say 20 people kind of started this Eleusinian mystery thing in Greece, expanded it to thousands of people, and they're in like this safe agrarian culture where, they're not getting murdered like their whole village isn't getting sacked every 2 months or whatever. They're able to, we're going to be able to safely live another 30 years or whatever. So they're able to do these rituals and come up with new ways of thinking that are probably available for one of the first times in history. We're pretty sure, I think, in the historical sense, that the Egyptian religion was kind of based around some psychedelic use. The blue lotus flower has some pretty serious psychedelic properties, and they had access to it. really rich culture. So they were probably able to do some see commerce to get access to really new and novel things that various cultures had, and somehow assimilated into their stuff. I think they found cannabis in there. I think there was some evidence of tobacco. I'm not positive on that, but I think there was some evidence of tobacco in some sarcophagus stuff.
Mm,
And I think they were also doing commerce with Asia a little bit. So they probably had some access to poppy,
right. Hmm.
and probably whatever else is going on over there. And mushrooms travel, so
Yeah.
maybe they had access to mushrooms. Who
Yeah.
knows?
Yeah.
Really
It's
stuff.
really interesting. And yeah, going back to the film, it's just, I don't know. I always find that time period to be so interesting, and it's so cool to hear different perspectives and learn a little bit about the history. And I really liked, I forget if it was Nick or Tim that were saying that they were just riding on the backs of those who came before us. So they were just doing what was already being done, and that was like those people were like their teachers, and it was passed on. They're just kind of doing the work.
Right.
So I'm
Yeah.
guessing like, oh, it was Osley. They taught Tim, and then it was just
Who were
really
all this
interesting.
time? It's interesting to me they didn't really feature Hoffman at all. I wonder to what degree Hoffman kind of influenced that counterculture in that generation. As a Swiss chemist, he's probably a little removed.
Yeah.
Going
Yeah,
forward.
I was really surprised they didn't introduce Hoffman at all. I mean, they just had like that footage of like Sandoz pharmaceutical,
Right.
but yeah, I'm surprised they didn't mention like the history of how it was synthesized or anything like that. Maybe they're targeting that audience that already knows all that stuff, and they're really just trying to hone in on an American story.
Right. Which is really well done. Like, again, I really recommend people check it out. I hope we can have, what's the dude's name? Cosmo, filmmaker. I really hope we can have him on in the future. I think I'll reach out to him today, maybe. It'd be cool to have Nick Sam too, just to get a little bit more of this stuff fleshed out. And, he probably had like 100 hours of footage, and he had to condense it down to like an hour and a half.
Right.
But the story that he must have uncovered must be even more expansive than the story he laid out, the narrative he laid out in the film. There's got to be so much cool stuff that happened.
Yeah. What was something that like really jumped out at you when you were watching the film?
There's a lot, man.
Yeah.
Living in boats in Sausalito, that's probably right where like Alan Watts was. And so I looked at Windsor on the map. That's just a little north of Santa Rosa, which is probably an hour out of San Francisco in the northern direction. I liked how they got a plane. They learned how to fly and got a plane.
Yeah.
Promptly arrested, but I thought that was pretty awesome. Just kind of the touch points with Leary. The fact that there was this East-West integration, that's not usually told. We're always told about the split between the pranksters and Leary's
right.
cult. And the fact that these guys kind of transcended those groups was really fascinating. The fact that there's this trafficking network called the Brotherhood of Eternal Love, that was really neat. The fact that they got to interview one of the leaders is really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, that is really interesting. I was thinking about that. Watching Sand be at the Leary estate, and then Billy Hitchcock was kind of helping fund this project to connect the West Coast and the East Coast. And yeah, I kept thinking that too, where you had the Merry Pranksters on the West Coast, and Tim Leary didn't want to have anything to do with them. And
yeah, their program of research was very different.
Yeah,
than Leary's.
But realistically, there are these connections.
Yeah, they're right on the top.
Yeah.
Sand, Tim Scully. It's really it's just the whole story is fascinating. It really, I hope, informs a lot of the chemists out there right now that it's cool to make drugs, but be very careful. Don't set up a storefront in downtown St. Louis saying you're a research
That was, yeah, that part. I was like,
so
wait,
bold.
he's just.
That to me is just like the peak of inflation. Say, okay, we're going to set up this company right in front of everybody's
But
face.
I wonder if he was manufacturing anything else legitimate and then manufacturing LSD on the side as like just
He must
another.
have.
Yeah.
I don't know how else that would have worked. Like,
We're just gonna go to St. Louis and put a lab right downtown and be
well, it's a
really
good
open
spot
about
for
it.
national distribution. You know, it's
Yeah,
equally
it's in the middle.
between all these the coast and the corners of the country. So
Yeah.
Yeah, and your smugglers can take it right to the Caribbean through the Mississippi.
Oh man.
Just that whole concept of running and evading the law and shaking a tail. Like, I could not believe that scene. Wait till you guys see that. It's a holy moly moment going, nope, I would not drive at high speed on that road with modern cars, never mind cars from the 60s.
And I was thinking about that because Nick was saying that, they were going through Mill Valley. I don't know if you've ever been out to Mill Valley before, but my friend drove me up through the mountains through there. And some of those roads are so narrow and they just cut back and forth. And they're just surrounded by these huge redwoods. And in my mind, I was just like viewing myself just running through those mountains and being terrified. Some of those roads are nuts. And oh man, I can't imagine just like tailing it through there and going over the mountain and then going up the coast or something. Yeah, it's wild.
It's quite the whole story is just so classic and so dramatic. I remember hearing an interview forever ago from Nick Sand. It was probably like 5 years ago, maybe 6 or 7, like on a podcast interview, and he just blew me away, like telling his story a little bit back then. That was my first even inkling that this history existed. And Orange Sunshine, whatever, so influential to me to hear this person with pure and theoretically pure intentions and really going at it and still being that committed so many years later. Like, I think he's equally committed now as he was then. It's just
probably
a different way because he can't going to jail kind of probably changes your perspective a little bit.
Well, and that was really interesting. Tim was saying that too, how he got out and his trip started becoming more paranoid and he kept seeing like police in the trees and he couldn't just have like a nice experience anymore. And I wonder about that too, like how like being like caught up in the system and then coming back, like, you see a different perspective and you realize, wait, there are these like kind of forces lurking out there and it's not always like light and happiness. And I don't know, that paranoia has got to be really terrifying if you're using psychedelics and running from the law. That came through my mind. I was like, how could they just keep doing that? Like, I'd be absolutely terrified.
So I gotta wrap in a minute here, but yeah, the whole concept of like tripping in prison too.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Outrageous. Like, how, like, you're potentially locked up for 20 years and you're going to get really high with all these potentially violent people around.
I couldn't believe that they were smuggling stuff in and having those sessions. Like, that blew my mind. I was like, kind of cool, probably opened up a lot of people's minds, but at the same time, geez, like, I can't imagine.
There's an article on Reality Sandwich magazine a while ago from one of Tim Leary's ex-girlfriends where he would get acid and whatever else smuggled into the prison in the same way, like through the mouth. You're allowed one kiss. So, make it count. And just that whole story of her executing that transaction is really fascinating. I hope I can find that link. But cool. Anything else you want to jump into?
No, I mean, I would definitely, recommend people checking the film out, and it's definitely worth watching if you're interested in like a bit of history and to get that background on, where some of the acid was coming from in the 60s and learning about the manufacturing. And yeah, so
an exciting slice of history presented in a great way. And I found out as soon as the movie was finished, when I was streaming it from Amazon, I found out there's a documentary on the Eternal Brotherhood of Eternal Love, which I'll probably watch really soon. So that would be cool to talk about too. And yeah, if you guys want to support us at all, we're gonna have a link in the show notes and in the episode notes, and you can give us a fraction of the revenue of that movie rental or purchase through the Amazon affiliate program. So, please do that. If you're going to buy it, just, click on our link, and, it'll give us 25 cents or whatever to lights on here.
Yeah, it just keeps us running and keeps us keeping up with the technology bills and all that good stuff. So yeah, we appreciate that.
Yeah. So again, our website, psychedelicstoday.com. Kyle has a website over at settingstonwellness.com.
.com. Yep.
Yeah. And I have one, Breckenridge Breathwork on Facebook, or breckbreath.com. And I have a workshop coming up February 18. Medicinal Mindfulness, Psychedelic Shine, February 12. Dennis McKenna in Boulder, Colorado. That's going to be really cool. Check that out. You'll probably see some video or Instagram footage of it. I'll try to share the hashtag or whatever on our feed so you guys can check out what they've got going on. And I think that's it. Again, if you want to really help us out, reviews on iTunes are the bomb, or buy some stuff from us on our Amazon affiliate page.
Sweet. Yeah. Well, it was great chatting, Joe, and kind of reviewing this film. I had fun time watching and talking about it. So
it's great. Yeah, I can't wait to share it with people, and I'll probably watch it again in the next few weeks.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Kyle. We'll talk to you soon.
All right. Take care.
All right, too. Bye-bye.